I am joined by two of Australia's best football writers, Jason Goldsmith and Lucas Gillard. Thank you for being my guests today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, likewise.
We'll start with the book, Be My Guest. So just how did you guys come up with the idea to write a book about guest players in Australian football? When was the initial creation of that thought in your mind?
Well, I actually had the first idea because the book I'd written previously, I interviewed Tony Dorigo, and he talked about Justin Fashanu playing at Adelaide City. So I did a bit of research into that and noticed that he had a couple of guest stints then. It was also just on the back of Usain Bolt trying to make himself into a footballer. And there always appears to be an article on George Best playing in Australia about once a year. So Lucas and I drove from Melbourne to Jamboree for the inaugural Football Writers Festival together. So we had a good solid 12 hours in the car to talk through ideas and players, and that's where it came about. And yeah, it went from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we didn't just talk about the book. 12 hours, we would have had it. We could have almost spoken like an audio book. But yeah, no, look, Jason, it was Jason's idea, and it was a really great idea. And he and I both have similar football sensibilities. So yeah, and Jason and I have known each other for quite a while. We used to play at the same cricket club.
We also realized there's way too many of these actual guests and stars for someone to do it themselves, that it would actually take a bit of a team effort. So Lucas and I did a bit of a divide and conquer. You want to look after this player, I'll look after that player, and that's how it sort of came about. We've got a list of players that didn't make the cut for different reasons as well, almost the B team, but that's what we decided upon. The ones that were probably the biggest names and had some form of impact, some good, some not so good.
And just how did you guys sort out which players you were going to cover and which players Lucas was going to cover between yourselves?
Sometimes we chose ones that we had an interest in and we might like. My wife's from Perth, so there's a bit of a WA contingent that were in the book. So I decided that given that I know WA a little bit, I would try that. There was a few others that Lucas wanted to do. We kind of just sort of split it down almost 50-50 that way.
Yeah. Where it made sense, because there'd be the same people we might have to interview for two different players. So we tried to group them that way. We did quite a bit of research before that, didn't we, to look at who these guys had played with, who they played for, who they played against, and then kind of worked it out that way.
Yeah, Lucas did this amazing spreadsheet where he put together, when we're going through who played with who and against who. And so if we speak to this person, they would know X, Y, and Z. So like I think our first interview was with Rally Razic, because he coached some of these guests, he coached against some of these guests. He's also, clearly well regarded in football circles and around the inaugural sort of National Soccer League. So he was the start, and then we had a bit of crossover. So I used some of Lucas's interviews in my piece, and vice versa, made it through as well.
And Lucas, behind you, we can see you've got the cover, which has George Best on it. It's right here. Brilliant photo. Just how did you guys decide what was going to be the cover? Like, was it always going to be this one, or did you have a short list of like 3 or 4 images?
I think this was always the front runner. Jason's kind of was pretty invested in the photos. I trusted him that he'd make a good decision. But this one was always kind of the front runner, wasn't it, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Lucas and I both thought it was definitely going to be the cover. And then when we showed it to Benita, our publisher at Fair Play Publishing, she's like, yeah, this has to be the cover, because there are 3 promotional girls for 4BC Radio in Brisbane, where he was guesting in 1983, and he's reading, if you look at the back of what he's reading, it's got his advertising games for Preston Macedonia and South Melbourne and stuff like that. It's pretty very Australian. So yeah, definitely worth it. Covered everything for us in terms of a guest player playing in Australia.
You mentioned a little bit earlier that you had sort of a list of players you were going to include, writing it down, and there were a few that didn't make the list. So were there any notable ones that didn't make the list that you want to share here?
I guess the concept of a guest player was going to be a short stint. So we kind of looked at around, 10, 11, 12 games is probably maximum. I think William Gallas is in there and he played 15. So for that reason, we left out the likes of Del Piero, Dixie Deans, Robbie Fowler, Shinji Ono, that kind of thing, Emil Heskey, because they played for a little bit too long for them to be considered a guest.
Yeah, and then there was a couple of others who, you know, might have played a few games for Spurs, didn't then moved to Australia. The ones that made the list of the guest stars were the bigger names. It sort of made a lot of sense to go with the ones that we chose.
And the other thing,
maybe the only exception, Peter Barnes. So he played for England, but he bounced around the world. He played in about, I don't know, 15 different countries and played for both Manchester teams. And he was maybe a bit stiff to not make the list, but we had so many other players to write about. We weren't.
I'm actually reading his book. I'm actually reading his book right now, Lucas. There you go. Because he played two games for Footscray Just in the National Soccer League. So yeah. And the other thing with football people too, Shannon, is that they will tell you of the ones that you missed out on and tell you things that they know. So there was a couple that snuck in we'd already submitted a draft, and we discovered that Danny McGrain, this Celtic legend, had played in Queensland, and Zola played an exhibition game with the two Italian clubs in Sydney, and we're like, oh, we have to include those. So we sort of did some last minute ads. But it's not an encyclopedia, it's just the ones with the best stories or the best resumes. That's pretty much made the book.
One of my personal favorite segments in the book is the almost, like those players who almost ended up signing and playing guest stints in Australia. There are a lot of good stories there. There were a couple that weren't mentioned. For example, Tony Sage asking David Beckham in person if he wanted to play for Perth Glory. But I noticed Daniel Sturridge was in there, and he only signed a couple of months after you released your book. So when you found out the news that Daniel Sturridge was linked to the A-League again and then eventually signed, were you a bit frustrated, or did you see it as perhaps an opportunity to branch it out into something else in the future?
Seeing it as an opportunity, first of all, I was shocked. I had a bet with Jason that he wouldn't, which I lost.
A case of beer on my way.
Yes, I know. I have to go and buy that. So I was really surprised because the recurring theme with those players that feature in that chapter was that you read articles about them saying they're coming, they've signed, the guy's on the plane, he's arriving tomorrow, and then they never arrive and you never hear of them again. So that was kind of what I was expecting Sturridge to play out like. But in fact, he's signed. We're seeing it as a benefit. It's a kind of a really great continuation of our story that we can maybe, if we're smart, capitalise on.
That's it. And if he's I hope for Perth Glory's sake he's not, but if he does manage to only play 5 or 6 games and break down or something like that, then we would probably have to add that extra chapter into the book.
That's right. And of course, he continues a long line of Liverpool players to play in Australia. And that's always an interesting story as well, an interesting angle, which, there's several of them appear in the book, of course.
Now, in this book, you cover both NSL and A-League, and finding a lot of information about the NSL, particularly the early days, is quite difficult because a lot of it was well before the internet was even a thing. So information about these players would be pretty scarce. So was there any player that you found particularly hard to find information on, like detailed information? And how did you come about some of this information for some of these more obscure players at the start of the NSL era?
A good question. So we've managed to network a lot and find a great assortment of historians in Melbourne and Sydney and around the country as well that have been always willing to help and share that information. So Mark Borich in particular, we would pay nod to because he managed to scan in all these soccer weeklies around the NSL era all the way through till it finishing. And that was just amazing. Pre-NSL, those guys were the ones that were tough to find about. There's some guys that played, like a Franny Lee played for St. George beforehand. A famous Manchester City person that's also a millionaire with a toilet paper business. So during the pandemic, he would actually be a little bit richer, I would have thought. But there wasn't much to do with him in print. But I managed to talk to one of his old teammates, Rally Razic knew him, that kind of thing. So we get a little bit of that stories from the guys that were there.
Yeah, for me, Ian Caligan was an interesting one to research because there was a lot of articles about him, but another Liverpool legend, a lot of articles about him, but a lot of differing perspectives. I really struggled to discover what contract he had signed. There was in varying pieces he had signed either a 2-year deal and he was going to be back. He was going to play for 2 seasons. Then he just disappeared after 9 games, I think it was. So getting differing competing objectives, differing competing perspectives on players was part of the challenge. I guess that's any historian's challenge, really. But as I mentioned before, with these guys and the early football journalism, they were prone to hyperbole, and which is good. It makes for interesting reading. But things are definitely happening. This specific thing will happen, but then it not happening, and no follow-up articles saying, "Oh yes, Caligan left because it wasn't a 2-year deal. Sorry, it was just a guest stint." That follow-up article doesn't exist anywhere.
That's right. And I think when you mentioned the final chapter about the rumours and innuendo and that kind of thing, that was really big around the late 70s, early 80s when the National Soccer League was there, because that probably had the most guest players of all, because the seasons were differing to England in terms of Southern Hemisphere playing in the winter. But yeah, there'll be an article saying Eusebio's coming next week. And then the next week it says, oh, he missed the plane. And you're kind of like, is he coming? Is he not? So yeah, it was pretty cool.
While you were doing your research on the players and the stories, there's obviously a lot of interesting stories about just how a player gets from overseas to Australia. So was there any facts that blew either of you away with just how wild and bizarre they were?
Well, in the early days, they didn't really have agents. So it was a lot of network. I mean, probably it's still the case today. A lot of networking between people who knew people, and Brisbane Lions putting in a call to Everton to get Bob Latchford to do a guest stint, and so it was all these sort of personal networks. That's how these decisions were made. The other kind of vaguely shocking thing by today's standards is that these big first division teams would allow their players to come out and play, risk doing a knee injury or something, and just allowing it to happen because it was sort of out of sight, out of mind. Whatever happened in Australia it wasn't real. It never got reported back home either. So it was kind of a low risk thing. And if Bob Latchford wanted to go to Brisbane and have a family holiday and work on his bung hamstrings, then the club was okay for that to happen.
The one that surprised me the most was Sir Trevor Brooking, because he won the FA Cup for West Ham, and then he was in the 1982 World Cup. And then 1985, he retired. He's come out and he's playing the equivalent of NPL 2 in Perth, and like the end of the train line in WA. And that's just for a network of people that knew his bookbinding business in the UK and managed to why don't you come out here and have a 6-week holiday and play a couple of games? Just amazing to think that you've got a guy of that caliber who then went to the royal wedding and got knighted and the rest of it, playing for Kelmscott. It's crazy.
So obviously with this being about guest stints, the stints are very short, as you mentioned, and they can go either one or two ways. It can either be a complete disaster or the player can come out and completely outshine everyone else. So for both of you, I'll start with Lucas. Which player do you think had the most disastrous stint, and which player do you think had the best stint, in your personal opinion?
It might be one to share this answer because we actually split the players up, and I got the really good ones, and Jason got the busted asses. So the absolute bangers were the ones that I wrote about. So I'll answer those. So Davey Provan, 5 games, 5 goals, 5 wins for Sydney Olympic. That was unbelievable output. Bob Latchford as well. I mentioned 5 games, 4 goals for Brisbane. These guys were obviously operating on a different level and were able to elevate their teammates to something close to what the First Division was doing, I think. But yeah, there are some horror stories, aren't there, Jason?
There are, and the chapter on busted asses was based on John Cosmina describing Romario and how he was playing for Adelaide United. But I think the bigger two pun definitely intended, was probably Nicola Berti and Mario Jardel. So both of them turned up on reputation. One guy, Berti, had been like the best player in one of the World Cups, but then was clearly relied on his fitness for his game and was overweight. And how Jardel was recruited and played is just completely farcical. Recruited off YouTube highlights, missed a World Cup squad with Brazil, got a lot of social problems after that. Got recruited again. He turned up on the wrong visa, couldn't play. He never played a full 90, never scored a goal. Just an absolute miss.
To be fair, his YouTube highlights are pretty impressive.
Well, and they mentioned that. So Gary Van Egmond, I interviewed, who was coaching Newcastle at the time, said he just let fly with this headed goal from training one time like a bullet, and everyone's like, "Oh, what is that?" But couldn't put it together given his physical condition.
Yeah, I also had Icardi that I wrote about, and he was sort of he was a victim of his own of Marconi's marketing. I think he was billed as this AC Milan star, but in fact he was at Milan during the Tottenero. Apologies to Italian viewers of this. Apologies for my pronunciation. Through that scandal. So they'd actually been relegated and were playing in Serie B in the early 80s. And by the time Berlusconi takes over the club, he's not around anymore. So he was largely a Serie B player and maybe the bottom level of Serie A. He certainly wasn't an AC Milan legend or AC Milan star, and couldn't put it together on the pitch.
And in that chapter as well of busted asses is Usain Bolt, but to be fair to him, he wasn't a footballer. But the circus that followed him around, we will all remember for a long, long time. So, yeah, he's in there as well.
Now, while we're speaking of dodgy recruiting, one bit in the book that made me laugh, and I'm so glad you boys included it, was the story of Dexter Rosales. So when you first decided to put that in the book, was there any hesitation considering he wasn't a real player, or was it something you were always going to do?
I included that little bit on Dexter in there because it just went with the theme of everything. That's, a lot of the time they want to drum up publicity about who's coming and look at their background and look how great they are. So most of the names are big in that book. Dexter clearly not, but his resume read quite well for someone who was going to play in the A-League. But the fact that without knowing if he's real or not, that they promoted it and publicized it, that's what made it the best.
It wasn't uncommon in the early days of the NSL for players who were looking to play for a club to be advertised in kind of like a personals ad. So we had a couple of those that didn't quite make the cut, but back in those days, and who knows if they were real players? I presume they were. But,
And finally, a question that goes out to both of you. This time we'll start with Jason. Which guest player do you think has had the biggest impact on Australian football, and why?
What the book shows is that it gives you an initial sugar hit in terms of crowds, maybe membership, definitely publicity in terms of newspapers and TV and that kind of thing, but they don't tend to stick. The influence ones that I can think of are probably Kazoo, in terms of getting, you get Shinji Ono and Honda knowing exactly about the A-League and all the rest of it because this legend has played 4 or 5 games for Sydney FC. And the thing with Romario at Adelaide United, like as much as that was a bit of a laughing stock, the next year they recruited 3 Brazilians, then they made the final of the Asians Champions League. And these Brazilians knew who Adelaide United was because Romario had played for them. And now the children of these Brazilians are playing in Australia. So that might be the legacy that it leaves.
Yeah. So some of the guys I spoke to about Ian Rush argued convincingly that he left an imprint on that club's ability to transfer some of the big young players, like Brett Everton being one. And there's a couple of others that got transferred around that time, that he kind of put them on the map. He helped connect to clubs in Europe, and eventually they were able to get pretty decent transfer fees for some of the younger players. I think those guys, like Everton, probably would have joined clubs in Europe anyway, but There's some people who will defend Ian Rush's role. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Lucas mentioned Davy Provan before. So Robbie Slater credits Davy Provan that he played against Davy Provan, who tears it up. And he goes, well, okay, this is the level I need to be. He finishes playing 90 minutes in the National Soccer League, goes home and runs laps at the local park to increase his fitness. So, you get a little bit of an influence that way.
Ironically, it might actually be Icardi because he's still around. He's still playing a role in coaching. He must have liked Australia. It didn't quite work out for him on the pitch, but the following season he returned and was coaching Marconi, and has, he's still involved he is involved with AC Milan as well, and runs coaching clinics in Australia. So in terms of a lasting impact on the sport, it probably was him. I mean, it's a theme in our book is that these guys would play and leave, and a recurring theme being that even if they were able to drive up crowds temporarily, they didn't stick. People that came to watch Keegan play in '85 didn't stick with Blacktown after he left, sadly. So that was just definitely a sad kind of recurring theme in the book, I think.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, boys. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you're interested in picking up the book, I would recommend it. It's on fairplaypublishing.com.au. Yeah, check it out if you haven't already got it.
Thanks for having us, Shannon. It's been great. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks very much.
This video is sponsored by Arrow Sport. Go to the link in the description and the friendly team at Arrow Sport will help you create your own football dream jersey. Whether it's starting from scratch or using one of their many templates on their website, creating a jersey with Arrow Sports is easy and prices start from just $50. Go to www.arrowsport.com.au and make your football kit dreams become a reality.